Okay, well, it's 6:02, and don't want to keep too many of you waiting on this cold and snowy night. But thank you for joining us tonight. And we have been working on various ways to engage the public in these broader discussions. We've used town halls in the past, and this is the first one we're using in 2025 to do a virtual town hall. So I really appreciate the turnout tonight and people's interest in this really important subject for our community. We think that town halls also allow not only our locals to participate, but people from out of the area. And certainly on nights like tonight, we're not traveling to a meeting and catching people in unsafe conditions out on the roads tonight. So hopefully everybody's home safe and sound. We have a lot of staff on the presentation tonight. They're going to be available to answer questions for you on these both topics for tonight. And I'm going to suggest that you all learn, if you don't already know about Zoom, that you can write your questions in the chat. And if you click on the Q&A icon and type your questions in the pop-up window that you're going to see. So we'll have staff as well as consultants ready to respond to your questions. And then once you've heard tonight's presentation and seen the questions and answers, please feel free to email further comments or call our office for more discussion on these items. And so with that, I'm going to introduce Seth Warren, our engineering manager with Department of Public Works. He's going to be talking about our State Route 89 and 267 transit priority and evacuation lanes. And Seth, just for a bit of history, because I predate you, we've been talking about whether using the bike trail as an alternative solution or gondolas or whatever for at least probably 30 years that I've been involved in transportation discussions on this 89 corridor. And so I'm glad to see that we're finally making some progress and moving things forward. So with that, I'll let you take over.
Thanks so much, Supervisor Gustafson. So I noticed that my Zoom name is James, but I just wanted to just share that I'm supported by James Pangburn and Derek Kirkland from Wood Rodgers. They're our consultants for the project, as well as Andy Dykin from our office here at the Tahoe Engineering Division. So sorry for any confusion on that. I wanted to talk tonight about the strategic implementation plan that we've been working on for SR 89 and 267. It's all based on the Resort Triangle Transportation Plan, or the RTTP, which was adopted by Placer County Board of Supervisors in October of 2020. The RTTP included a number of key recommendations that work together. It looks like our PowerPoint's loading up right now. Thank you, James. It aims to reduce congestion during peak periods, optimize the use of existing infrastructure, such as roads and parking areas, promote public transit use on SR 89 and 267, implement parking management programs in town centers, such as Kings Beach and Tahoe City, promote the use of mainline fixed transit routes, supplemented by microtransit for the first and last mile, and promote alternative modes of travel, such as active transportation along trails and bike routes. Now, just a reminder, SR 89 and 267 are two-lane highways built to rural design standards. The RTTP included a recommended cross-section to address some deficiencies on these existing highways. Foremost, it recommended that the roads be widened to add a reversible, center, transit-only lane, and/or HOV lane. Can you go to the next slide, James?
Am I good?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Let's go to the next slide now, too. All right. In June 2023, Placer County initiated the SR 89 and 267 Corridor Management Strategic Implementation and Phasing Plan. It's a deeper dive into the feasibility and alternatives for improvements recommended in the RTTP. It's primarily focused on a feasibility analysis of the transit-only lanes, but it also includes high-level study of environmental impacts, right-of-way constraints, traffic and transit operation impacts, climate sensitivity, community resiliency, and evacuation capacity. As part of this effort, the county formed a technical working group that included, among others, Public Works staff, the County Sheriff's Office, the Town of Truckee, Highway Patrol, Caltrans, the Truckee North Tahoe Transportation Management Association, Tahoe Transportation District, Tahoe Regional, TRPA, and the Nevada County Transportation Commission. The study area included in this plan, there are two main corridors in the study area, I should say. There's the first corridor, or the first segment, is on SR 267 from Schaefer Mill Road to North Star Drive. On the same corridor, we understand that Caltrans is pursuing a separate truck climbing lane project south of North Star Drive. And the second segment within the study area is on SR 89 from West River Street in Truckee to SR 28 in Tahoe City. And with that, I'll turn it over to our consultant team. Next slide, please.
All right. Thank you, Seth. Thank you for the introduction. So I'll get into some of the meat and potatoes of the strategic implementation plan. Seth outlined the goals pretty well. When we started the project and looking at this study, we had the recommendation from the RTTP for a center running reversible bus lane. So that was our starting point. And as we moved into the study, we, as a team, including Placer County and the technical team, we started to look at some potential other alternatives. So we've got the original RTTP cross-section on the top, showing the reversible bus lane. And then we have another alternative, alternative 2, which has outside running lanes. Some of the reasons why we started looking into a different alternative, just ease of enforcement from CHP was a discussion. So easier to enforce that outside bus lane, some more flexibility in terms of having outside running bus lanes. Driver expectation is a little simpler, and you end up not having to have a central operations center to run the buses back and forth. So a lot of our study was really trying to truth out the benefits of these two alternatives. So we started looking at some of the benefits and the downsides. So when we look at just starting from a project footprint standpoint, the alternative 1 is on the left in the orange, and the alternative 2 is in the right in blue. And so the existing highway is typically around 40 feet wide. Alternative 1 comes out to about 58 feet wide with the center running lane. So the reason it gets a little bit wider with that is that you have to have some safety buffers in between the main traffic and the center running lane. And then when you look at alternative 2, it's about 64 feet. So you've got your 2 travel lanes, 2 bus lanes, and then your outside shoulders. So the intent of this graphic is really to show that the additional width for outside running lanes wasn't significantly more than the original alternative. And with that little bit of extra width, you get a lot of benefits. So looking at some of the benefits, looking at the green thumb going up. So we have less safety concerns with outside running lanes, more efficient transit operations, which means you can run buses at a more frequent rate. You've got less intersection impacts, meaning the turning movements are a little bit more straightforward at the key intersections. You do get the benefit of additional evacuation capacity in the event that we want to be able to use that extra room for emergency uses. You don't have overhead signage or any other traffic indication for the bus operators to use, so it lowers the overall maintenance costs and the visible appeal of the corridor. In winter, you pretty much still have a standard running highway. You don't have the visibility issues with those traffic signals for a reversible bus configuration. And then it's easier to enforce by CHP, which I mentioned earlier. The downsides to for alternative 2 is you have a higher initial capital cost, which that means construction is the big cost there, and then long-term maintenance, and then you do have a slightly larger footprint. So you can see there's lots of benefits, and then there's some clear downsides as well. We did a good extensive comparison in terms of looking at costs and basically comparing, evaluating the two different alternatives with through different categories. So up at the top, the table shows the construction costs for SR 267, looking at alternative 1 versus alternative 2. So initial cost for that one came in just over 40 million. And then when you look at alternative 2, it pops up to about 48. So while the cost is higher, it's not significantly higher. So understanding that, we start to look at all the evaluation criteria. We looked at constructability, environmental impacts, right-of-way, traffic performance, transit performance, operations and maintenance, safety, agency support, and then the total infrastructure capital cost. So in a lot of ways, these bars, we scored them 1, 2, or 3. In a lot of ways, they were even. You can see a lot of even scores kind of canceling each other out. But then there were some key areas where alternative 2 really started to stand out. And so looking at traffic performance in terms of the additional bus lanes and being able to have those transit lanes have dedicated use in both directions was really a high benefit. Operations and maintenance, we wouldn't need to have a central operations center to make sure that the buses were timed correctly. So these are some of the key differentiators that we saw, and then I'm going to go to the next slide as well, and this is for SR 89. So we still have the same differentiators and benefits that we see with the outside running lanes. However, 89 is a different corridor altogether than 267, and the costs for construction are much higher. So alternative 1, with widening the highway from existing 40 feet to 58 feet, reducing, ensuring that we're not impacting the Truckee River and building walls, the cost starts to go up pretty high. So that one landed about 220 million, and then alternative 2 bumps up to about 250. So it's a high cost, but you can still see that the in terms of a percentage, alternative 2, it's only an incremental difference. So I'm going to go to the next slide. All right. So in terms of transit demand, we really tried to look at what the potential was when we started to add transit-only lanes. So the existing service numbers are here in the first column, and we really tried to focus on the daily ridership potential. So we're looking at average weekday at 260, winter weekend at 430. But when you start to when you add those lanes in, you start to increase the ridership numbers, and then when you have a target of a 2.5% mode share, you really start to see that number rise up to 900. I think, Derek, you've got some history on these targets in terms of some background planning documents, but really what this table is intended to show is the potential for getting people out of their cars and using buses. Okay, so very similar table, but for 267. So I'm not going to go through the details of this one as well. Similar information. All right. So we did, the RTTP did identify the need for parking. And as we carried it into this feasibility study, we realized that there's a lot more that needs to be learned. And so we really just identified what's the existing condition of parking today in terms of public lots. And you can see them located around the screen here. We did not do any additional analysis in terms of how much parking is needed to support transit service. Things are ever changing. So this slide is really kind of a caveat of what we didn't do with the feasibility study, and acknowledging that future study is needed to identify where parking can go and how much is needed. Okay, so starting to look at the next steps in terms of how do we implement this project. So on the left, we have our infographic here, which really just outlines the basics of a Caltrans project delivery process. So I'm going to start in the upper left quadrant with the project initiation phase. So that's a specific phase you have to get through Caltrans. The purpose of that phase is to really identify, okay, we have a project here that allows you to move forward and program further funds to move into the next steps. So the next step is the project approval and environmental document phase, or PA&ED. So that includes a project report with Caltrans and then the environmental document. If there are federal funds involved, you'd be looking at a NEPA component as well. Then you move into the final design, or the PS&E, plan, specs, and estimate, and into construction. So those are the four main pieces to delivering a project on a state facility. And then on the right, we broke the project up into 3 separate segments with no specific priority. These were intended to be projects that had their own independent utility, which means if you built the project, you would see an immediate benefit and meet a need for providing those transit facilities. So they weren't numbered 1, 2, 3 as in terms of we liked that one more than another one, but they're just numbered. So the first segment is along the 267 from the county line up to North Star. Segment 2 in orange goes from the county line, or West River Street, down to Olympic Valley Road. Then segment 3 would carry those facilities from Olympic Valley Road down to Tahoe City. So we're starting to look at the project in terms of, potentially as like 3 different phases moving forward. Okay. Can't get into implementation without looking at the project risks. So this is a very wordy table, but I'll just draw your eye to the colors. Okay. So green is what I would call a low risk, or a very like typical risk for a highway project. Going down the risk categories, is it fundable? Is transit going to end up using it? What's the constructability? How hard is it to get environmental clearance, permitting, right of way, public opposition? These are all project risks that you take a look at when you're doing projects on the state facility. So segment 1, just by nature of the width of the right of way, the terrain, it's a much more lower risk type of project. And as you start to look at the other segments, segment 2, for example, so that's West River to Olympic Valley, the risks start to get a little bit higher due to the complexity of the project. So we're identifying that there are additional project risks to delivery for that one. And then getting into segment 3, this is the most challenging area. It's the most complex. You've got a couple bridges right there south of Olympic Valley Road. Trains a little harsher. So yeah, so you're going to end up having more risk moving forward with the project. Okay, so very colorful schedule here. So what we tried to do here is say, okay, if we started the whole process now, here we're in 2025. We've got set the different segments up here at the top again. How could this potentially flow down in terms of a schedule? So the first thing that the county is planning to do is get some additional data on the project to help support grant applications and try to position the project well for funding. The feasibility study, while it is comprehensive, it didn't add any new data into the mix. And so that data can be very powerful in terms of showing the grantors what the need of the project is. So 2025 is kind of slated for that. And then we have this project initiation document. So we've allocated 1 to 2 years to get through that process. We would imagine potentially doing one document to cover all three. But then as you move forward to clear environmental, you might look at doing those as separate projects. And you start to see the timeline start to grow as the complexities get as the complexities increase. So going through all the steps again, PNED, right-of-way and final design and construction. So you can see a difference of, 5 to 6 years in terms of if you started day one and you start to deliver these in succession, how it might look. Obviously, everything's funding dependent. So, but we're just trying to kind of tie the risk to a project delivery schedule. Our study does include a pretty good menu of potential funding opportunities. Obviously, funding conditions change based on administrations, but these are the typical federal type projects that we would try to turn over and take a look at. There are several programs that can be involved at the state and federal and local level. And we're always looking for additional opportunities in the future. But we got down as many as we could based on the current funding situation. Okay. All right, wrapping it up. So next steps. Seth, do you want me to kick it back to you?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, so thanks, James.
Yeah.
So we plan to take the completed strategic plan to the Board of Supervisors at their Tahoe meeting on April 1st. We're tying up the loose ends on the report in anticipation of that presentation. During this month of February, we're also presenting to a number of committees and business associations, such as tonight with the OBMAC and NTRAC. We previously presented to the TCDA as well as the NTCA in the past few weeks. We are hopeful that the plan will be adopted by the Board of Supervisors after that, or as part of that April presentation. As James mentioned, we are looking at performing additional data analysis of traffic during the high peak seasons. So we want to kind of focus on spring, summer, fall, and well, I guess we'll kind of focus on summer, fall, and winter. Those are when we anticipate there will be the highest traffic volumes. So we want to have a representative study. And based on that information, we will then start the PID process in spring and summer of 2026. And I think that wraps up our presentation for tonight. So we welcome your questions and thank you for your interest.
Well, thank you. Thank you all very much. We appreciate it. And I want to remind everyone, if you can type your questions into the Q&A, we'll try to have staff respond. But I'll read the first question, which is, will you be presenting to the North Tahoe Business Association Economic Vitality Committee? Is that on your schedule, Seth? Do you know?
It's not on our schedule yet, but we're happy to present, and I can reach out to the team members over there and get on their schedule.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? We have a lot of folks online, so I hope you'll type in questions as we can. I'm not seeing any questions right at the moment. I did want to share that in addition to the funding sources that you mentioned, I know that Congressman Kiley has reached out and been interested in maybe supporting this project into the next phase with some congressionally directed funding request. And so we're working on that with our coordination. Okay, now I have a couple questions coming in. Is there any coordination with Truckee to continue to I-80?
I could, yeah, go ahead,
Yeah.
sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to
Sorry.
say, yeah, we've been working closely with the town of Truckee as we develop the plan. We understand that there is, a constraint at the mouse hole there under the railroad, right? So that mouse hole improvement is currently, it's actually outside of Placer County where it's located. But we understand that in the Nevada County's Transportation Commissions, I believe it's in their 2016 Regional Transportation Plan, it's listed as an unfunded project. So we're kind of working with town of Truckee as well as Nevada County and a number of other agencies to identify some opportunities to improve the continuation to I-80.
Great, thank you. Another question, is there any shorter term plan to aid in evacuation? And I might jump in on this, and I know we have some of our law enforcement sheriff's office, at least in the participant venue. We have many plans to address evacuation. Our sheriffs and our OES department are working on evacuation constantly. This has been a significant question we've all been asking for a number of years. And I would need to defer to them and talk about what they do in the short term. But as far as physical improvements, I think there's some segments of this that we've talked about where there are capacity limitations. What can we do? And then how we use contraflow, how we control traffic feeding into this corridor to make sure that it moves smoothly in an evacuation situation. But that wasn't part of this study unless I'm incorrect on that. Once in a while,
No,
I get
correct.
an answer right, Seth. You're nodding, so maybe I got that
correct.
one.
Yeah, you're right.
Right. When 267 becomes wider, what happens when it meets Kings Beach, a 2-lane road?
So that is another portion of the segment on along 267 that's outside the constraints of this study. Our study took 267 from Schaefer Mill Road to North Star Drive. As we mentioned, Caltrans has a separate project where they're looking at truck climbing lanes. We know they're planning to go to construction for an extension of the existing truck climbing lane in 2028, taking it from its existing terminus up to, I believe, Martis Peak Road. And beyond that point, that is kind of in their purview a little bit. I know we have another project that Andy Dyken in our office is working on, which is a potential roundabout there at the 28 and 267 interchange. So I can't answer your question fully, but it definitely would need to be, it's all part of the overall study by Caltrans, and yeah, hopefully that provides a good answer.
Thank you. This says, I want to know how you believe this is a complete study without necessary parking determined now. Are you considering growth in Reno and Roseville in your study?
Do you want to jump on that, James or Derek?
Yeah, I can. This is Derek Wood Rodgers. I can take a stab at that. So, there was a big conversation about parking when we first started this. And this study was really limited on looking at the feasibility and kind of analyzing the alternatives for transit only lanes. We do understand that parking is a big part of that, but as we kind of got into some of the discussions, we talked a lot about transit operations, which was a little bit outside of this to some degree, is really where that parking analysis needs to be. And we realized right away that there's going to have to be probably a fairly large parking analysis where we collect data, where we analyze potential uses. I think there's a lot of moving parts when we start talking about the parking. in the future. And again, this is an early phase, kind of building on the RTTP. And as this moves into the PID phase, as James had recognized or had kind of mentioned in his presentation, we'll get into a little bit more detail, but there's a lot of coordination that'll have to happen with the town of Truckee, with Caltrans, with a lot of other stakeholders at play. But I think, part of that is understanding the regional connectivity of transit. How much parking do we need? How many buses? And that's the benefit of the outside transit lanes, is we're allowed to accommodate a whole lot more transit use than just TART, where if we had the center running lanes, it was really limited to a public agency running a transit operation. And with that, because of the outside lanes allow for so much more flexibility in the future, it's hard to determine exactly how that's going to impact parking going forward without a more robust study specifically focused around transit operations and parking. So where we've kind of left that at this time is that we'll continue to work with Placer County will continue to work with the working group and kind of identifying a scope for what that parking analysis is going to look like going forward. But there are a lot of regional elements to that in terms of how people are going to use transit. Are people going to start using transit from the Bay Area, from the valleys coming up to Tahoe, and how that's going to impact? Maybe we don't need as much parking as we think we do. And so that's just something that'll, we're going to have to keep looking at. But the real focus of this study right now at this time was really just to look at the feasibility. How do we accommodate the transit lanes on these two corridors? So I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Seth.
Nope, I agree with that. Were you going to say something, Cindy?
Well, I was going to expand a bit in that we are also working, and this is a very long project, as you all saw the timeline till construction. So a lot can change between now and then. One of the issues we've also been working on is increased passenger rail to Truckee. And if that were successful, there would be maybe more of the day users or short-term users could come on train and not need parking. But there's also parking needs with that. So I think our whole region is struggling, looking at how much parking do you build and where do you do it. And until we have a transit system that encourages them, we don't want to encourage just more cars. That's clear. The next question was, what accommodations do you plan to make for Highway 89 Truckee River property owners regarding their access?
I'll throw this one to you, James, as I know you've done significant study on this corridor.
Yeah. So it's still a very high level. So based on just the preliminary line work we have, at least for alternative 2, which is one we've been talking about mostly today, there would be no changes to access. It's really one of the benefits of that alternative in terms of, yes, we're going to widen the highway. We would have to, reconstruct driveways. But when you look at alternative 1 with the center running lane, that bus lane would be basically, think of it like a center median barrier, right? So you wouldn't be able to use it as a two-way left turn lane in any way. So actually, with the dedicated bus lane, all those properties would end up being right in, right out, which would be very challenging because then you'd have to provide U-turn opportunities. So from a circulation standpoint for all the driveways along 89, we felt like alternative 2 was superior in that way. And there would need to be driveway details. This would come all the way down into the PS&E, final design level, because we're still very high level. But the plan right now is that there wouldn't be any impacts to access to the properties. Hopefully that answered that question.
Thank you. We have a couple questions in the queue about what happens with the change in current administration, any risks to the federal money that you've identified, that we've talked about. And I think we all are very, very aware of the change in administration and some of the issues ongoing. And this administration will also change. So I think, looking at the longevity of these projects, we have to continue to secure everything we can and hope that in the future, again, money is available if it isn't readily available now. But it's certainly something we're all tracking at the county level. I think statewide, everybody's looking at these numbers and trying to understand that. We've had a couple other questions. One is, what about the tolling, toll roads, and why not push for that? Of course, I think I've shared this in past town halls that both governors at the time, both Nevada and California governors, have not allowed us to talk about basin entry fees for the Lake Tahoe Basin. That would certainly raise significant amounts of money to help us achieve a lot of our goals. We continue to work on that. Nevada has some laws that make it more challenging to do tolling than in California. And we will continue to pursue all avenues, and this might lead to that as a necessary way to fund a project of this magnitude. Had another question about why is there such a big difference between the cost for 89 and 267 segments on a per mile basis?
Do you want to take that one, James?
That's me. So, yeah, so kind of looking back at the project risk table that I threw at you with the different colors. So 89 is more expensive per mile because of, the terrain is more challenging. So you've got the uphill slope on one side, Truckee River on the other. So when you do work in those areas, there would be retaining walls that would have to be implemented at a lot of locations. So those are driving up the costs. Plus there are, 2 or 3 good sized culvert crossings there where culverts would need to be extended. And also there's two bridges that cross the river just south of Olympic Valley Road. So at these like key locations where you've got structural elements, that really drives up the cost. 267, the terrain is much more forgiving. There's challenges there, but much more forgiving. The right of way is wider along 267. It's just, it's for a lot of reasons, it's just a much more straightforward project through that area.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And then another question that has come in, and this again is a policy and permitting question. If after a transit lane is built, can it become just another lane for cars if something comes up like we can't afford bus drivers? So I know that's probably not in our engineering group's head, other than the permitting and the requirements that would go along with a project of this magnitude. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, definitely say so. And it's not the intent of this effort or this study to increase VMT. We're trying to reduce VMT and to make transit use more enticing for all users.
Great. And we are having success with our other micromass transit and alternative transit systems that we are able to get drivers for. So we hope to continue that. Stephanie, I see you're on. Have I missed any? Or Bridget, have I missed any other topics in the questions? One individual asked if Congressman Kiley's going to be in Truckee next week, what commitment? I think continuing to put pressure on him. You won't get a commitment from him, but to let him know how much the community needs solutions to our traffic congestion problems, that we see that growing as we see the growth in Western Nevada and Eastern California, the Valley and the Bay Area. And we do need federal support to help with that. So anything you can second on our request, we really appreciate constituents asking directly as well. Stephanie, I'm just looking, do you see anything else on
Yeah,
here?
I
know you-
apologize. I was kind of typing some answers. Did you answer the question from Danielle Hughes on tolling?
Yes.
Yeah, I did mention the tolling and that, you know, both governors currently oppose it, but we're continuing to work on that, as we know other areas of the state as well are needing to come up with alternatives to gas tax as we transition to electric vehicles. So we're certainly continuing to work on that and advocate for it.
Right, and I did type a few other responses to different questions that came up as well. But I think you covered it.
Okay. Bridget, are you seeing any others that I've missed? I know it's hard on the.
One that I can't. Did James, were you able to answer, is there any shorter term plan to aid in evacuation? You said you wanted to answer that live.
No, I don't think that was me. Are you thinking of Seth maybe? Because I think
Oh,
that's kind of like the evacuation comes into the mouse hole.
Yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, right. And Bridget, I tried to answer that with our law enforcement officials have evacuation plans currently. Some of that includes contraflow, management of the traffic entering the corridor, and how they restrict that to make sure that those who most need to get out quickly get out quickly. And part of it is controlling that traffic and making sure that they're doing that. So, but for physical improvements, I'm not aware of any that we've talked about other than the work we're doing in forestry along both sides of 89 to make the forest safer along either side in the Caltrans right of way. So we have less likelihood of trees in that area.
And so with that, Supervisor, I think you've answered every question.
Okay. Good. Well, thank you all for great questions and great answers. And now we're going to move on to our next topic. Kevin, are you stationary or are you in your car?
I am stationary and I am in my car. Yes, I apologize for being in my car. I have 4 kids and all 4 of them had somewhere to be this evening. So I'm in the parking lot outside one of their events. So I apologize for that.
Great. Well, for those who don't know, Kevin is our Assistant Director of Public Works for Placer County. He's stepping in on our next topic, which is the North Lake Tahoe Parking Management Program update. Rebecca Tabor has retired and we have not appointed a person to replace her yet. And so it bumped up to her superior, Kevin, who is quickly learning everything there is to do on parking management and I'll let you introduce Julie as well, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you, Cindy. Yes, it's there's a lot to learn on parking management, and I've been doing my best over the last month and a half. And Rebecca's last day was last Friday, so this is my first week in officially without Rebecca helping hold the steering wheel. So I'm doing my best to get caught up on all the great work that they've been doing. And so I did want to start with, Rebecca and Dixon, and we have Julie Dixon and a couple of other members from Dixon on the call tonight. But they've been doing a great job over the last couple of years, taking nothing really. We didn't really have a parking management program 2 years ago to what it is now. And I know there are probably folks out there who think maybe we should be going faster, and there may be folks who think maybe we should be going slower, but we've had limited staffing resources and are starting to try to build that program and build the staffing resources that are needed to roll this out in a stepwise manner that makes sense for the community and is something that's achievable that we can do well at each step, so we're not overextending ourselves and having an issue where we're not able to do what we need to do in each particular step of the rollout. So with that, I did want to just start at a high level for those who haven't been plugged into this. The Resort Triangle Transportation Plan is really where the parking management effort began, at least for this group. And the parking management plan was a big part of the discussion on that RTTP. And as everybody here knows, parking is an issue for everyone in the community. It's an issue for the business owners who have people parking out in front of their business and going to the beach for the whole day, and then it doesn't allow anybody who wants to patronize their business to find a parking spot to be able to go in and provide business or use the business that's there. We have issues with residents who are unable to park in their own front yard, potentially because have parking overflowing from the beach areas up into the neighborhoods. And then there's also frustration from visitors, right? So we understand that the parking is an issue for everybody. It impacts everybody. And we're trying to work our way through that and see what we can do to come up with solutions that help address some of those concerns. You can see the slide here. We have the goals of the parking management program. So it includes managing the impacts from increased travel demand and associated vehicle congestion, supporting economic vitality. As I mentioned, we're trying to set it up so that we have turnover in front of the businesses so that the people who are trying to visit those businesses have a place to park and can go in easily to those establishments. Alternative transportation, reducing reliance on private vehicles. We've actually been talking about some of that here already tonight. And it is part of the RTTP that I mentioned earlier. Making sure that it's safe and accessible for all users. Achieving some of the environmental goals, including lowering emissions and vehicle miles traveled. And then again, mitigating the spillover parking impacts on the neighborhoods that I mentioned a second ago. I do want to highlight some of the work that Rebecca and the Dixon team have been doing over the last couple of years. And so I did ask Rebecca for a list of some of the things that they've been doing in preparation and trying to get this program off the ground and to a point where we can start rolling some measures forward. And so, first of all, as I mentioned, the RTTP process, they had a huge, extensive outreach program, and parking management was one of the key pieces of that outreach and that plan in general. And then from May of 2023 to present, Rebecca has presented 5 times at board meetings. I think at least 2 of them were in the Tahoe Basin, and then there were a number of other times where items did get to the Board of Supervisors under consent. We've also been working with the North Tahoe Business Association, the Economic Vitality Committee. Rebecca mentioned that there was a walk, field walk with them in April of 2023, and then at least 4 other focus meetings with EVC, and it's one of the groups that we want to continue to work with. And I think I do need to reach out to a couple of folks there. We're talking about trying to establish more of a community advisory effort. And so I'll be reaching out to EVC to see what opportunities there may be to partner on some of the existing meetings that are already taking place as a potential forum for that advisory group. There were 10 community meetings, including 2 with Spanish translation services. 2 of these meetings were also held at the NITRAC. There were, again, we mentioned that community advisory group. There was a meeting in July of 2024 with key stakeholders that included the county CEO, DPW, Town of Truckee, North Tahoe PUD, Whitecaps Pizza, Strong North Tahoe, and the EVC. And then held at least 14 key partner and stakeholder meetings over the last 2 years. There's been some additional outreach efforts, including a survey, website updates, Engage Placer, North Tahoe North Tahoe parking business cards that we could pass out, press releases, parking ambassadors, a couple of TV sessions or segments. And then in January of this year, 70 letters were hand delivered to property owners regarding the Brook Avenue parking configuration. And then an additional 20 letters were mailed out and we received a couple of responses from business owners on Brook. And then this will be discussed later, but we are proposing some modifications to some of the parking with the feedback that we received from those business owners. And so I mention all of that just to highlight the efforts that have taken place to get to this point. And then also to highlight the fact that we want to continue those efforts to engage with the community and move forward in a way that works for the business owners, for the residents, and even for the visitors that are coming to the basin. So with that, I am going to introduce Julie Dixon. She's going to take the bulk of the presentation tonight. And then I think I'll be back at the end. But Julie, go ahead and take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kevin. And if you'll go to the next slide, Jennifer, for those of you that don't know myself or Dixon Resources Unlimited, I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you for coming tonight. We know that everyone has very busy lives, but we also understand how much parking and transportation impacts everyone and where you live. So the opportunity to be able to have this dialogue is so important. And one of the things that Kevin mentioned that I can't emphasize enough, besides the extensive community engagement that will continue as a result of this project, also the cross collaboration of so many agencies. You all can appreciate, because this is where you live, the impacts of the highway, the impacts of the state parks, and just the fact that so many departments in the county actually effectively help manage the parking resources in and around Kings Beach. So what we're about to present here today was not an easy lift, and we're not done yet. And forgive me, I have a little bit of a tickle in my throat. Okay, so Dixon Resources Unlimited, we are a parking and transportation consulting firm. And the one thing that's really unique about Dixon is the fact that we really do focus on solutions. And one of the things that we also like to highlight is that we've been working in and around the Tahoe Basin for about the last 10 years. And so it's something that when we talk about the interconnectivity of the project, we're very proud of. And sorry, I'm going to throw another throat lozenge in my throat to make sure that you all don't get to hear me coughing. So with that, this is something that when we talk about parking, it's not an overnight solution, and something that we've spent a lot of time helping build the solutioning and some of the changes that have taken place. This is the beginning of what we hope will be a comprehensive and holistic solution. Jennifer, if you can go to the next slide. So tonight, what we hope to do is to basically provide you with the introduction that Kevin just shared, but also provide you an overview of the project. And very importantly, give you a retrospective of what really occurred this last year, and then talk to you about the recommendations that we have moving forward. We'll obviously be here to answer any questions at the end of the presentation. But one of the things that I can't highlight enough is that we are trying to make change. But one of the items that Kevin highlighted, it's also about resources. The reality of being able to manage the limited resources while still finding balance for quality of life for those that live there and work there. This has really been about trying to, I'll call it, connect the dots and making sure that we have that engagement so that when we do try to make solutions and try to implement change, we can understand what that ripple effect can be on neighboring businesses, as well as accessibility and on traffic. And it's an important part of the conversation as we navigate today's presentation. Next slide, Jennifer. So the first thing we'll do is do a review of the parking management efforts of what we basically accomplished this last year. Next slide. So when we're talking about the area for the parking management zone, hopefully everybody can see on their screens, the highlighted areas were what we were considering the study areas. We'll talk a bit about Christmas tree lot as we get a little bit deeper into this presentation. But when we talk about the key initiatives, the first piece was compliance. I think everyone can appreciate that it was a bit of the wild, wild west in the past. The reality of having parking enforcement in past years was something that was really a non-mover because our resources were so extended. We had highway patrol focused on traffic accidents and traffic mitigation issues, that the reality is cars were just parking wherever they could park, wherever they could fit. So one of the first things that we really wanted to focus on is trying to ensure that people were parking where they're supposed to park. And so a number of things happened where you saw some of the space markings, some of the signage going up. Most importantly was having the dedicated resources to help focus on compliance. And notice you'll hear me use the word compliance very specifically, because this project was not about writing parking tickets. And I'm sure that you will appreciate a lot of parking tickets were written, and we'll talk about that. And some of you may think we should have written more, but this was also something that we were trying to change behavior, to get people to park where they're supposed to park, where they're legally allowed to park. So we really tried to focus on education and outreach. And that education and outreach was not just about our tourists or our visitors. This was also about the people that live and work here as well, because we too were people who have also taken advantage or potentially abused the rules as they maybe haven't been enforced as consistently in the past. So this was a big component of this project. Something else that was really critical to this project was data, and will continue to be data. So something that we'll share in today's presentation is talking about the importance of why data is going to be so relevant moving forward. So as we talk about making recommendations, potentially changing hours of operation, changing rates, this all comes down to data and utilization. And the benefit that we have over this last year is that we have outstanding baseline data so that we can also measure the ongoing effectiveness of any program changes moving forward. And lastly, and I'll go into more granularity about this, was the paid parking demonstration that was effective for the last portion of the summer season this last year in the Christmas tree lot. So we'll get into some of the details of what I'm highlighting there for these key initiatives. Next slide, Jennifer. So I mentioned compliance, and this was really important because when we talk about the resources required to ensure compliance, this was important to ensure consistency and frequency. This is really key, is to make sure that we had enough coverage to be able to enforce effectively the posted regulations. Now, again, when I talk about enforcement, we issued a lot of warning notices. We used flyers, we used messaging, all of the key stakeholder outreach that Kevin mentioned. This was all tied into the overall program. We also leveraged cross-department collaboration when it came to being able to ensure that we had day, evening, and weekend coverage. I should also mention how much work went into making sure that we could have online efficiencies so that for those parking citations that were issued, customers would have the opportunity to make appeals online and to be able to efficiently and effectively address notices that were issued. Now, for many of you, that might seem seamless, but the reality is it was very important that we had to ensure that the infrastructure was set up to ensure that the agency could handle the volume that could potentially impact and potentially shut down an operation for that matter. So these were all key factors that when we talked about the staffing and resources required to support, that's often something that could be an afterthought to the everyday person. But the reality is when you launch a program like this, you have people that want to appeal a citation. They want to call and talk to somebody. They want to maybe complain to somebody. Those are all staffing resources that we have to be sure are available so that we can, again, focus on education and making sure that we're answering the questions that are asked. It's important that we want everyone to have a positive experience and a learning experience so that they know what the expectations are for them when they come to utilize our area, and knowing, again, how to follow the rules. Again, community feedback was really key. And the reality is we probably could have written a lot more parking citations, but again, that wasn't the goal. The focus of this last summer was to ensure that people knew that the rules were going to be monitored and it was going to be different than maybe it's been done in the past. And this is where when we talk about the enhanced warning process, going that extra mile, making sure that people understood the overnight parking restrictions that were going to be enforced. And then more importantly, and this was something that we heard extensively from the community, was the 72-hour violations in the county lots. This was something that we heard loud and clear, that we found that there maybe were vehicles that were being left potentially abandoned or for longer term stays. And that was something that we were able to more proactively address, especially as we talked about the cross-department collaboration with the different agencies being involved. Overall, the program was deemed a success when we talk about improving compliance. And you can see that from July 1 through the end of September, we issued 1,266 parking citations. And what's important about that, for those program dates, 20% of those citations were appealed. So the reason why I mentioned the resources required, even with the automations, even with the processes put into play, that is a very heavy lift. But I want to highlight, this is not uncommon when you launch a program like this. Our goal moving forward is that that number will reduce significantly as we move forward. But again, I think everyone can appreciate the fact that this was different for many when we came to the area. And that's why we saw the contest rate being as high as it was. So this is something that we will definitely strive to improve. But I also want to reinforce, it was really about encouraging people to follow the rules. And I think everyone can appreciate that number of 1,200 citations is truly just a drop in the bucket when we talk about the number of cars that are impacting the region and in the area. So that's something that as we talk about the program moving forward, it is going to be really important how we talk about managing compliance as we talk about how effectively we can utilize our resources. Next slide, Jennifer. So I talked a little bit about data. Now, some of you might sit here and think, why should I care about data? Well, in the parking industry, 85% occupancy is the definition of when you basically reached or are near or at capacity. And it's when agencies need to start making parking management decisions. It's important to highlight that number because when we start to talk about impacts, it basically can effectively change time limits. It could change the rates that were charged. There's several factors that can basically come into play. One of the things that we were able to do for this project is between July 8th and September 12th of this last summer, we utilize license plate recognition technology, or what you'll hear me call LPR technology. Important about LPR technology is it basically records the license plate associated with the vehicle. Now, sometimes people hear that and they get really worried about it, but what I want to highlight is there is no lookup of the license plate. The license plate is simply the unique identifier that is utilized so that we can start to monitor how long cars are staying for, if we see them returning to the area, and it basically allows us to identify what the occupancy levels for the different streets and parking lots are. And we can also start to gauge the utilization, how fast we're turning those spaces over so that we can understand the compliance in our posted time limit zones. And also when we start to talk about the paid parking locations, which we'll mention in a moment, is that people are actually complying with the paid parking regulations. On the left side, you can actually see the occupancy numbers by block face and by parking lot between July 8th and August 5th. And I'm sure it comes as no surprise, the closer that you are to the sand and to the beach, the redder the locations are. Now, I want to highlight that this data is the average for all of the data that was collected at all times of the day and early evening. On the right side, this is basically during the period of time that the paid parking demonstration kicked off in the Christmas tree lot. You can see again the same averages, the same times collected, but for that period of time, what the effectiveness of the parking occupancy numbers are. Now, on the left side, that's where you can see the overall average parking occupancy for the study area was 82%. You can see that that's in red because this basically reinforces that this is when the agency needs to start considering what kind of policy changes may be needed to affect parking change. On the right side, for the last half of the summer, for when the occupancy was collected, you can see that the overall occupancy decreased to about 48%. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we dig into some of the other details of the parking recommendations. Next slide. Great. So I mentioned the Christmas tree lot. The Christmas tree lot was picked specifically because of its proximity to the lake. And in the Christmas tree lot, there are 27 parking spaces. And between August 6th and September 30th, we basically ran a paid parking demonstration project. The goal of this project was to collect feedback about the technology and the policies associated with this particular location. The expected lower occupancy in the slot with paid parking was not necessarily a surprise, because the reality is you could go almost anywhere else in the area and find free parking locations. But it's important to highlight that before we launched the paid parking demonstration, the average occupancy for the Christmas tree lot was 82%. When we launched the paid parking demonstration, it decreased down to 52%. Again, no real surprise there if I can park somewhere else and it's free versus parking in this location. And that'll be something that we'll talk about the strategies moving forward. It's important to recognize that the kiosk that you see there in front of you, or what's also called a pay station, that equipment accepted both credit card and cash. And it was important to highlight that 89% of the transactions were completed by credit card. But it is also very important to recognize when we talk about equitability and accessibility, it was important for the pilot that we wanted to ensure that we could provide payment alternatives so that community members would have the opportunity to also pay with cash. This solution did not include a mobile payment solution, and we'll talk about that moving forward for the next phases. Important for this pilot, which was again August 6th through September 30th, the net revenues were $9,445 and some change, and it covered all the direct program costs and the portion of the staffing costs associated with this program. And this pilot basically allowed us to, I'll say, dip our toes into paid parking management in the area. Some of you might wonder, what did we charge? The all-day rate was $10. There was a flat evening rate of $5, and we had a peak and holiday and weekend rate of $20. And these are things that when we start to talk about how you can manage parking behavior, you can absolutely use payment rates as an option for how you can affect behavior. But one of the things that we also want to talk about moving forward is how to comprehensively and holistically manage paid parking as a whole in the area. But again, this sample was intended to be an initial start. Next slide, Jennifer. Great. So community feedback about the pilot. The positive feedback we received, the pay stations were easy to use. Long-term parkers thought the pricing was fair and accessible. They liked the signage. They liked the on-site engagement, because I should mention, not only did we have our parking enforcement personnel there and present with the flyers that you see there on the right side, we also had public works staff present as well. And this was really important because, again, just like everything else that we've described, this was something that was different in your community. And we wanted to make sure that everybody understood what was different and why it was different. Some of the potential improvements from the feedback that we had was to consider an hourly rate with dynamic pricing for shorter term parkers. For example, we had a lot of ice cream shop patrons that wanted to park there because it was quick and accessible to get to that location, and they wanted more options for payment so that they could utilize those shops. They also asked for a mobile payment option to improve their customer experience so that they could just use their phones. And there was also the suggestion of having alternative languages like Spanish as an option on the pay station for customer usage as well. All items that would be very feasible for the next stage of the project. So Jennifer, if you can go to the next slide. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the upcoming summer and the proposed strategies that would go along with that. Next slide. So when we talk about the general parking management strategies, what's really important to recognize is that supply is limited. That is a reality of this area. And when we talk about how to maximize the resources, one of the items that's listed here talks about public-private agreements. As we prepared to launch this last summer, we spent a lot of time speaking with the local business owners, because I'm sure it comes as no surprise to you, the local businesses are impacted by our visitors to the basin and those that want to go to the beach. And some of those encounters are not very positive. So one of the things that we really tried to focus on are helping with solutions and ways that those business owners could help, I'll call it, protect their assets. But what we're also looking at moving forward is the opportunity to bring programs to basically expand the program that could also incorporate some of those business solutions. One of those locations that's been talked about before is the grocery store parking lot, and some of the other parking lots could potentially become a part of that. And those are areas where Public Works has been in touch with several of the business owners, and those engagements continue. Also important was prioritizing the implementation of what we call active loading zones on the State Route 28. This was of importance because when we talk about the Kings Beach parking lot in particular, when that beach parking lot gets full, it tends to have a backup impact on the highway. And what we were looking at is being able to leverage some of the bulb outs that would allow vehicles to pull over and allow their passengers to unload, get their gear out so the family can head off to the beach while the driver can go off and park in a more remote location. As well as when we look in front of some of the business locations, when we talk about active loading zones, it makes it easier for business owners to be able to unload product, also to receive deliveries during the day, but also can allow for those quick passenger pickup and drop off locations. When we talk about the operations from a management strategy, is the consideration of dedicating parking program management from a full-time employee standpoint. This is one thing that's been important. This has been a team effort. The whole comment of it takes a village. This program has taken a village and then some, because again, this was really building a cohesive solution that also wasn't going to, flip the community upside down. But the reality is so much work has been done. We need to identify a resource to help manage this moving forward. And again, the opportunity to continue data collection, the ability to re-verify inventory after the winter season, and to continue to collect data and to restart data collection, honestly, as soon as the snow melts, so that we're basically readied for the summer season. If we can go to the next slide, Jennifer. This is also a critical component. Now, some of you might look at this and say, what the heck are all those letters? We went into granularity to define a very interactive, static wayfinding solution so that you could help breadcrumb or guide visitors to where they're supposed to park. And so getting into that detail, our hope is that we'll be in a position that will be able to strategically implement this wayfinding program so that it will be easier for people to identify those locations to park. They don't back up the highway. They can breadcrumb and find those available parking locations. And when we talk about permit parking, this is also something that's important because it's not just about our visitors or our guests. It's also about our employees and business owners that help support our local businesses and where they should park. So one of the things that we're also working on that needs further review is introducing not only a residential permit parking policy, that if the community was interested in pursuing that, but also being able to identify an employee parking permit solution that can be utilized for that longer term parking need that is necessary for those that work in and around the businesses as well. One of the nice things about the technology that we've introduced into this program is that everything can become license plate based. So it really makes it for a very simplistic process when we talk about how you can manage your own parking experience moving forward. Next slide, Jennifer. So the other piece that was mentioned, and I think that Kevin said this at the beginning, was the feedback that we received on Brook Avenue between Bear Street and Raccoon Street. You can see this diagram that's on the bottom of the screen. There was definitely some concerns about the length of stay of vehicles parking on these locations. And so the recommendations moving forward for this particular spot was to consider replacing one of the parking spaces with a 15-minute commercial loading zone on the north side of Brook Ave. And you can see that highlighted in yellow. And then to also consider implementing a 2-hour time limit on the south side of Brook Avenue with 6 parallel spaces, and then a 2-hour time limit on the north side for summer only. That's important. Why this is important, it was again to promote the turnover of these premium spaces for the businesses. Again, one of the challenges that we have, because this is such a popular destination, is that frequently we have recreational visitors who are parking in our commercial core and taking up those premium parking spaces that are intended for our businesses. One of the bits of feedback that we heard mostly from the community was that the community wants to be able to visit and patronize our restaurants and businesses during the summer season as well, but oftentimes those parking spaces are occupied by our visitors that are looking to recreate on the lake and over in the sand. The other reason about the active loading zone, again, to be able to create that access for our businesses. And then also the reason why you see that the one side of the street is just for the summer, the other side of the street we're suggesting is year round, because it also will support snow removal and create a snow storage space as well. Next slide, Jennifer. Great. So as we move forward, when we talk about parking enforcement, or like I like to say, parking compliance, we want to focus on compliance as we talk about the managed area that we highlighted earlier, and to now transition into the standardization of citation management. That would be supplemented with educational flyers. Something that was really well received up here on the right side of the screen was a flyer that one of our parking ambassadors created. They called it a parking fine menu so that people could understand what the violation penalties were if they continued to violate the rules. So this was, again, another community engagement opportunity that rather coming out there and writing a ton of citations, we really tried to spend this last summer educating and informing everyone that the rules are being enforced and that we're really seeking compliance. I mentioned license plate recognition technology. The 2 LPR vehicles were actually installed just this last month. So we are ready to go for the summer and being able to have that tie-in so that we can continue to collect data. And one of the important things on staffing is to continue to evaluate the staffing needs that we have and the importance of the number of personnel ultimately that will be needed to help be consistent and to provide the coverage that we're looking to ensure continues when we talk about parking management moving forward. We are suggesting that the county should consider hiring a full-time parking enforcement supervisor and 1 additional parking enforcement officer full-time with 2 extra help officers. For summer 2025, we're looking at the additional resources that would include a total of 3 full-time employees and 2 extra seasonal help overall. We'll go to the next slide, Jennifer. In terms of timing, the recommendation for the program moving forward would be to initiate and launch and be ready to go for Memorial Day, and then to operate again through the end of September. And again, focusing on compliance and customer service is really important because we are wanting people to park where they're supposed to park. Will parking citations be issued? Yes. But one of the things that's important about having a balanced and effective solution is making sure that people understand what the rules are. And that's one of the reasons why we know that we want to ensure that we have effective wayfinding so that people know where they're supposed to park. We also are suggesting establishing and expanding the paid parking locations to not only include the Christmas tree lot, but also the Brook lot and any of the shared parking locations that are potentially negotiated or established with the private business owners. We also know that we need to update the county code to update the paid parking program allowances. The program last year was a pilot, and from a technology and infrastructure standpoint, working with the treasurer's office to establish the new merchant and terminal IDs. That's already something that's in progress. Procuring additional pay stations as necessary. That is something that is also can be in progress. And then again, expanding the payment options to include mobile payment and text to pay so that you can provide as many conveniences as available to make it easy for people to follow the rules. And also the consideration of Spanish language options on the pay stations and any other payment methodology that is introduced. If we can go to the next slide, Jennifer, I know that we're almost done. And so this is when I'm going to hand the microphone back over to Kevin to wrap up this information.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. So our next step is to actually go to the Board of Supervisors, which is scheduled for next Tuesday. And there we are going to ask the board to adopt an ordinance. In the ordinance, we are planning to keep kind of more general in nature with a broader framework that allows us some flexibility to work within that. And then a couple of resolutions, one amending the parking fine schedule, and a second to amend or to establish a parking fee schedule. And the idea with that is that we would be able to make some tweaks as we learn, as we continue to gather data and see how things are working or not working. We can make some adjustments by resolution, or even by some items are delegated authority to the Director of Public Works to make some adjustments where we see a need to make those adjustments without having to go back through the ordinance process, which is substantial when you're talking about amending an ordinance. And so that's the goal. As I mentioned, we do plan to go to the board next Tuesday for the first reading of the ordinance, and then the second reading is scheduled right now for March 4th. And so with that, I'm happy to answer, and our team is happy to answer any questions that come in. I did see a few come in that I think have been answered as the presentation was going on. But if there are any questions, I think now is a great time to ask them.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Julie. Great presentation as always. Sorry for your cough. If there are questions, please type them in. I do know that we've had some already answered, and we'll look for any others, but I really appreciate everybody sticking with us tonight as we move forward on this item. And just again, if you have questions or concerns, you can email my office. We'll put you in touch with any of the presenters tonight or any of the individuals involved to dive into more details. And that email is Cindy Gustafson at placer.ca.gov. And email our office. We'll put you in touch with folks. There is one question here that's in the chat. I don't know if I fully understand it, Kevin. So
maybe I'll start with what we've already answered in another question, which it was for the total time period from July 1st to September 30th. During our study period last year, there was 1,266 citations issued. The year prior, in the same time frame, I believe it was 153 citations were issued. So that's the delta. I'm not sure if there's something specific in this question that is not answered with that information, but if there is, feel free to update the question.
Great. And I appreciated, Kevin, your outreach to the EVC and working with the existing meetings. I know we all have, I think most of us have too many meetings to go to, and it's too hard to track them all. So where we can get community support and input as we move these plans forward, that will be great. I'm not seeing any new questions come in, but I'll keep talking for just a minute and maybe some others will come in. I did want to mention to everybody who's joined us on both of these projects, you know, this is the county investing money in the efforts to serve you better. And, you know, I, as your county supervisor, am pushing for solutions on many issues that we face in our daily lives. I want to thank the staff who've jumped in and found solutions and gotten consultants looking at these efforts and solutions for us. Some of them are going to take a very long time, and they're very complex. The parking is complex, but it's not taking us near as long as it will when we look at transit corridor studies. And so I want people to know that we're not going to solve all these problems overnight. We didn't get here overnight. We're certainly not going to solve them overnight. But I'm always an optimist that the glass is half full. We've got to keep moving things forward if we have any hope of solving these issues. So thanks for your patience. So I talked long enough that we got some more questions. Thank you. Somebody asked, is that 153 citations for the whole of Kings Beach in the prior year, Kevin? Do you know?
Yeah, no, I was just trying to message the Dixon team to see if they knew. I think it's actually basin-wide, not just Kings Beach.
I do as well. But we can get back and confirm that number, but I do believe it is for the entire region.
Okay. And then we have a question about, is it possible to add signage for 1 hour parking in front of our businesses along the highway?
It's one of the aspects, because it's a state highway, it does involve Caltrans, but it is one of the items that we have put on the table. And it's one of the reasons why the data collection is going to be so key. And that is one of the strategies when we talk about being able to make adaptations. So it is a topic that is being broached, and it will require engagement with the state agency as well. Kevin, did you have anything more you wanted to add on that?
No, but it is, working with the businesses to create something that works for the businesses is part of this process. And so, yeah, that is definitely something that we want to work on, the signage, but then also, again, the enforcement, so that, or the compliance, so that we're seeing the benefits and the businesses are seeing the benefits.
Great, thank you both. I'm not seeing any other, one more question here. How are we resolving forcing all the parking in the grid?
I think that means the spillover into our neighborhoods. And that's where the readying the code for the potential of a residential parking permit program is something that we're basically introducing as one of the options. That is something that is not uncommon in a community like yours, where there might be a need for a seasonal parking permit that would basically ensure that you would have some available parking in your neighborhood communities. And that's important when we talk about monitoring the occupancy numbers, to ensure that we're working collectively with you all to see if we need to make any of those types of policy changes.
And then, sorry, going back to Adam's question about the 1 hour parking, Adam, if there are specific businesses or locations that you'd want us to think about, let me know that. Or if it's a general in front of all of the businesses along the corridor, if we could get a little bit more specificity there, it would help us kind of work through that.
And to email, the project email would be really helpful to identify any specific locations that you think would be preferred for a time limit change like that would be really helpful.
And then it looks like there was a question about the advisory group, and yeah, so I think my hope is that I can work something out possibly with the EVC and make it a part of some of their regular meetings. That would be kind of a standing item. I haven't had those conversations yet, so I don't want to commit to anything with that. But that was what I was thinking, is working with the EVC to potentially identify a standing item.
Great. And then there's a couple other questions in here. Is there an appetite to expand parking management to other beaches? Certainly there is from the supervisor, but I think we're trying to pilot here in Kings Beach and then look at where we use some of these strategies in other locations, because we certainly know anywhere where we have public recreation facilities, that spillover parking into the neighborhoods is definitely impacting people's quality of life, sometimes their own access in and out of their driveways and to their own parking. So I'm encouraged that we don't have to rely just on calling CHP to get responses. And some of the citations, the crew was able to come over and address some issues on the West Shore and in Tahoe City last summer. I know when there were complaints made on some of the issues, but I certainly think we should be moving forward on those as well. And the residential parking permits, I think, are another way to get there as well.
And
Yeah, and
good.
go ahead, Julie. Go
I was
ahead.
gonna say, Supervisor, we also did some work at Moon Dunes Beach as well. So I just wanted to highlight the fact that these were not ignored areas, but the reality is the monitoring and some of the initial data collection as well, so that we can ready for it. And I just want to reinforce the fact that you got to start somewhere was important, and really getting to this place now to hopefully position ourselves to be able to effectively manage and expand appropriately and accordingly. So that, again, this is about quality of life as well for where you all live and work too. So that we also just have to make sure that this is a program that is digestible for all of you as well.
Yeah, and I know I did a ride along with Zario, one of our parking enforcement officers. And I do know that we did take a tour through Speedboat Beach area and the parking around there, looking at signage and how we could improve some signage there and continue to do enforcement in that area. So I know it is on the list, and it is something that we are working on.
Right. And final thoughts or questions, Kevin and Julie? You see their emails here, and if you have additional questions, you can email Julie or Kevin or my office as well if you have additional questions that we can address as we move forward. So with that, we're just after 7:30. I think that's a good time to say good evening to everyone. Stay safe tonight. Thank you again for joining us and being part of the solutions. We really need your feedback on all of the work we're doing, and we really appreciate it. So thank you very much, and have a great evening, and we'll sign off. Thanks all.